Good evening, City Council. It's good to see you all. It's nice to be gathered together. Thank you for all of our visitors who are here in person. Thank you for all of our visitors who are here with us live or will be watching us through the week. It's nice to have you here. This is February 23rd, 2025. No, it's not.
24th.
It's the 24th on 2025. And this is a regular meeting of the City Council, City of Waverly, Iowa, and we are called to order. Would you join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And just to be clear, that was my mistake, not Carla's. She gave me a nice notebook right in front of me. Friends, your city clerk has prepared for you an agenda for tonight. Can I have a motion?
I will move approval of the agenda as presented.
Second. Any discussion? I hear none. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And opposed? That passed unanimously. Welcome back. This is Hannah tonight. Councilperson Drenkow, do you want to introduce your guest?
Sure. Hannah Radswell from Fergus Falls, Minnesota. Welcome to the Southland. She is a political science and criminal justice major and sociology minor, unless you've changed that. No, okay, good. She's also a resident assistant. She is a, look at my notes here, table tennis club president, which you probably have not been playing a lot of table tennis lately.
Not recently.
And then also a Knights Who Serve she's on the executive team of Knights Who Serve. So as a lot of students are at Wartburg, they are very involved people, very involved young people. So welcome tonight, and hope you'll be able to participate.
Thank you, Hannah, also to Seth and to Katie. It's been a real joy to have Wartburg students with us. If there's anyone who has public comments that they would like to speak about now for any item that is not on the agenda, now is your time. Please rise so I can call on you. Anyone who speaks to something that's not on the agenda? I see no one rising. We'll move on. We are now at item E. This is the study session calendar. We'll have a presentation, and I will ask Carla to begin. Connie. Wrong date, wrong name. Other than that, we're doing great.
Good evening. I'm Connie Tolan, Planning and Development Specialist. We're pleased to have Joel Hollman with us this evening from Maxfield Research to present findings of the recently completed housing needs analysis. The housing needs analysis is an important tool for the city in that it provides important data about the housing market. It identifies the gaps between housing availability and future needs, and it assists policymakers to make informed decisions about how to address current and future housing needs and to grow our community. It's also a critical tool for developers in that it helps them secure financing for development projects by demonstrating a market demand. And it also is typically a requirement when applying for housing incentive programs, such as the Workforce Housing Tax Credit Program through the state. That particular program requires that the housing needs analysis be no more than 5 years old. And in fact, they are now is kind of stating a preference that it be more like 3 years old or less. And our prior analysis had reached that 5-year mark. So with that, I will turn it over to Joe.
Thank you. Mr. Hollman.
Thank you. Thanks, Connie. All right. I first ask that you bear with me while I flip between glasses and no glasses. You can just go to the first slide. If you're not familiar with Maxfield, we've been around for almost 40 years now. We're a market research consulting firm specializing in real estate consulting, and we advise clients in all sectors, commercial, industrial, and residential. And we work both public and private markets. So a lot of our work is doing feasibility studies for private developers, and we also, about half of our business is with cities and counties working on projects like this. I've been with Maxfield for about 14 years. Prior to joining the consulting ranks, I was a city planner for about 10 years, and then worked in commercial real estate for about 10 years. So yes, I just aged myself. Go ahead. Excuse me, these are gonna fall. So, as Connie mentioned, the overall objective of a comprehensive housing needs analysis is to provide a broad look at the community's housing market. And we look at all housing product types, the for sale market, senior housing, and rental housing. And we do that by looking at demographic and market forces that drive demand for housing. And then we look at overall market conditions to see what the state of the market is now. And then we use that data to calculate demand. Most of our work for this project was done in late September and October. We delivered the draft in November, finalized the report in December, and that brings us to today. Anytime we work on a market study, we begin by drawing a market area, or we define it as a primary market area from which most of the housing demand will be sourced from. So for Waverly, the PMA is defined as the city of Waverly and then basically the adjacent townships and county subdivisions. But we understand that not all housing demand is going to come from this area. So we make select demographic economic comparisons to the surrounding MSA. Generally, we anticipate that about 70 to 75% of the demand will come from a PMA, and the remaining 25 to 30% comes from outside that defined area.
What is MSA?
The Waterloo Cedar Falls Metropolitan Statistical Area.
So what does MSA stand for?
Metropolitan Statistical Area.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead. I'm going to keep a lot of my comments really broad. If you looked at the studies, there's quite a bit of detail and numbers in there, so I'm really just going to try and focus on the main points. One, Waverly has really experienced pretty solid population and household growth, but we found that the rate of growth has slowed slightly. Between 2000 and 2010, the Waverly's population grew about 1% on an annual basis. That slowed to about just 0.5% from 2010 to 2020. Now we're projecting that to pick up slightly, and we're forecasting about 0.9% annual growth out to 2035. Most population age groups are expected to experience some growth in Waverly, but the strongest growth is really going to be among your older seniors, so your 75 and older population, and then your millennials, younger millennials, the 25 to 34 age group. So you kind of have a barbell of growth of the seniors and then the younger people who will be looking for housing. And that gets the final point on this slide. So new housing is going to be needed to support any type of growth in Waverly. And you have kind of a diverging demographic drivers here with older population and younger population that are going to be bolstering your demand growth going forward. So that's going to require a variety of housing product types. And I'll get to that towards
Mr.
the end.
Hollman?
Yes.
You never said that you're open to questions, but let's see.
Well, I am.
Okay. Why? The millennials? I saw that's going to be like 35% of our population by 2030. What's the driver there?
Well, it's just there is a it's also called the echo boom. So it's the children of the baby boom population. So it's just a larger cohort. So you had a baby boom, and then my generation, the echo boom, or not the echo boom, Generation X, which was lower birth rates. So it's a slower bulge in the population. Then the millennials, it's another big bulge.
So
it's a demographic trend.
There'll be more of them in Waverly because there are more of them.
Correct.
Okay, thank
Correct. Some of the other demographic factors that drive housing demand. In Waverly, the chart on the right shows household growth by age group and tenure from 2010 through 2024. So tenure means either owner-occupied or renter-occupied housing. And you can see that the largest growth since 2010 has drastically occurred in the 65 and older population. And then you can see kind of some of the waves as they've moved through. In Waverly, owner household growth has been quite a bit stronger than renter household growth. By our estimates, we believe owner households increased 18% since 2010 in Waverly compared to flat growth or flat renter household growth. Compared to the MSA, those trends are a little bit flipped. Across the MSA, renter households increased 5% compared to a 3% increase in owner households. As of their latest data estimates, about 77% of the households in Waverly are owner occupied, and that's compared to about 70% in the region. Some of the strongest growth has occurred among married couples without children. So that's typically going to be your older couples that have adult children who have moved out of the house. And there are also some married couples that choose not to have children, but that growth is really being generated by the older adults that no longer have children in the house. And then we've also had strong growth among other family households, and that's typically going to be like a single parent household. And that really drives demand for affordable housing, typically. I don't have the point on here, but so in Waverly, the family households have grown quite a bit faster than non-family households. But in the non-family households, which really drive demand for rental housing, you've had a 10% increase in roommate households. And I'll touch on that impact in a couple slides. But what we're seeing when you get more roommate households, that's fewer housing units that are occupied. So your vacancy rates have gone up a little bit, due in part to that. And I'll dig into that in a little bit more detail.
If you were making this presentation not to the council but to the school district board, would you call these numbers interesting or alarming?
Well, at this point, I would say they're almost typical. We're seeing these trends in a lot of markets, with the one exception being really since 2010 and during the late 2010s, there's a really strong growth in renter households across the Midwest. There's a lot of rental housing development, so Waverly is a little bit unique in that. The concern for the school district is the lack of growth that's in the call it 35 to 44 age group. The age groups that are having kids, that growth has been fairly flat, and people are having fewer kids. So again, that's not unique to Waverly. But a lot of Midwest rural markets, the school districts are experiencing either declining or flat enrollment. So the more you can do to get people in those age groups here to support the school district will be beneficial. Does that answer the question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. And just looking briefly at incomes, the median household income in Waverly just under $80,000. It's about 20% higher than the MSA, but projections are showing that median household income growth in Waverly is just going to be over 1.5% over the next 5 years, compared to almost 3% growth in the region. And a lot of that has to do with the age of your population. The senior households or people on fixed incomes don't experience the income growth as people in the 35 to 44 or the mid-age households. So when you have a strong senior population, it impacts your median household income number, if that makes sense, because they're not going to experience the income growth. Okay, go ahead. Looking at the employment side, unemployment, we don't have unemployment data at the city level in Waverly, so these numbers reflect Bremer County. Overall, the unemployment rate dropped from 3.5% in 2014 to under 3% in 2023. Equilibrium unemployment is considered to be 5% unemployment, which is kind of expected to be kind of the healthy balance between having enough labor available to make new hires and enough people having jobs. So labor availability is a concern, and it's going to impact potential job growth moving forward. You need labor to make hires, and housing plays a role in that. Since COVID, Waverly and Bremer County have experienced fairly solid job growth, about 4% growth between 2020 and 2023, and we're anticipating about 9% job growth going out to 2035. Again, hiring is going to depend on labor availability, and labor availability is going to depend in part on available housing. Average wages in Waverly are basically in line with the region, slightly lower. It's interesting that, so a worker earning the average weekly wage in Waverly could afford a rent of just under $1,400 a month, notably higher than the market rate average right now. But somebody earning that wage could afford to purchase a home price at $175,000, so about half of what the median resale price of housing is, of for sale housing in Waverly. So really, to afford to purchase a home, you need 2 people earning that average weekly wage. About 3/4 of the jobs in town are filled by workers coming into the city, so people commuting in, and almost 1,000 of those are coming from over 50 miles away. So Waverly has the potential to provide housing options for a number of those workers. Compared to 2010, so 17% of the workers that are commuting in are coming from over 50 miles away. That's a big jump from 13% in 2010. So that gets back to the labor shortage. So your employers have expanded their commute shed or labor shed. They have to reach farther to find workers to come in. And what I've heard during our interview process and over the course of the study, those large commute distances are having an impact. They impact hiring because people don't want to make that commute, but more often they impact retention. Yeah. Someone will take a job, expect to find housing at some point, then commute 50, 60 miles for a year and just say, I'm done, and then find something closer to home because they just weren't able to find housing in town. Okay, go ahead. The graph on the left shows residential building permit trends from 2014 through 2024 compared to the region. So the orange bars are Waverly, the gray graph behind it reflects the trend for the MSA. But overall, Waverly, housing development declined in Waverly post-COVID, which is a bit of an anomaly. In a lot of rural markets where I work, there was a spike coming out of COVID, a spike in development for all housing product types, especially multifamily housing. People moving out of urban centers into more rural markets. So it doesn't appear that Waverly really experienced that trend. Overall, from 2014 through 2019, you averaged about 61 new housing units per year, and that number has dropped down to 21 new units per year since 2020. Since 2014, just under half of all your homes that have been built have been detached single-family housing units. About a quarter, 23%. I listed them as townhomes here, duplex, townhomes, that type of product. And then another 27% were multifamily units, notably apartments. Okay. The graph on the left shows the shift in the type of housing that's been built in Waverly since 2014. The inner ring shows a breakdown of housing units by product type from 2014 to 2019. And during that time, less than half, or 44% of all the homes were single-family homes. And for this graph, I included townhomes. The regional data that I have includes townhomes with single-family. So to do a comparison, I combined them for Waverly. So from 2014 to 2019, 40% of your housing units were single-family, and 56% were multifamily units. Those proportions have shifted. So since 2020, about 87% of all your housing units have been single family and just 13% multifamily. And the graph on the right shows a similar trend, but not nearly as pronounced across the region. So the region has experienced a little bit more balance in the type of housing that's been developed. Okay, I packed a lot of information in this slide. So this represents your for sale housing market. Overall, increased competition has been driving prices up. The median resale price for single-family homes has increased 7% annually since 2019. And in 2024, the median resale price was $245,500. And then the median price for other product types, which would be your townhomes, twin homes, condos, that's increased 2% annually to $215,000. You don't have nearly as many sales in that category, so that median sale price bounced around a little bit just because you don't have the volume to create a real good trend. But it's interesting that, so a new construction home, the median price is just under $420,000, so about 78% higher than the resale of an existing home in Waverly. There's a big gap between new construction pricing and your existing product. The graph on the right shows number of resales per month since 2019. And over the past couple of years, that sales activity has been trending down. And a lot of that can be attributed to the increase in mortgage rates. And when I was going through my realtor interviews, everyone kind of said the market is just kind of stagnant right now. Not everyone, but a lot of people are just sitting and waiting for interest rates to come down before making a decision to either purchase or list their home for sale. So sales activity has dropped over the past couple of years. Marketing times have increased, and the market has just kind of slowed to kind of a sluggish pace. But having said that, at the time of our research, so in October, there was about a 2.5 month supply of detached single-family homes on the market and a 2-month supply of other product types. Equilibrium is a 6-month supply. So that's really showing that there's pent-up demand for sale housing in Waverly, but just not enough listing activity and not enough sales activity. Okay. So this table provides a snapshot of your rental market, broken out into market rate rental housing and then the affordable and subsidized rental housing. You don't have a real big inventory of affordable. When I say affordable, I mean income restricted, right? Not affordably priced, but a product that's income restricted, depending on the funding source. So we identified 3 affordable and subsidized properties in Waverly. They're about 3.5% vacant in October. Of the market rate properties, we surveyed all properties with 8 units or more, and that totaled to be about 414 units. The vacancy rate was over 8%. Nationally, equilibrium is considered to be 7% vacancy in rental housing. Typically, in more rural markets, 5% is kind of a number that's considered to be equilibrium. What I thought was interesting, I split the rental housing stock into the 5 newest properties and then all the older properties. So your newer properties have an average rental rate of $1,363 a month, which is 86% higher than the older apartment properties, which have an average rent of $734 per month. Newer properties are 12% vacant. The older rental stock is 4.5% vacant. So that's telling me that there's some price sensitivity in the market. I mentioned roommate households earlier. Typically we see growth in roommate households during times of recessions or economic trouble. People move in together to save money, right? It's just a common sense. So I think what we're seeing in Waverly is a lot of the new rental housing that's been built, it's higher priced. People don't want to pay it, so either they're rooming together. So say you have 2 people that would otherwise be in their own apartment units, now they're rooming together, so we have a little excess vacancy there. Or they're choosing older product or choosing not to live in Waverly if there's no affordably priced housing available. And some people, frankly, are moving into the for sale market. If you have to pay $1,360 a month for rent, you might be able to get into an entry-level home at about that same monthly rate. Okay, go ahead. Looking at your senior market, we break down the senior housing market by product type. So we've got market rate active adult product, affordable and subsidized product. Then we go into the service enhanced senior housing, which is independent living, assisted living, and memory care. Overall, you don't have any market rate active adult rental product in Waverly. But the active adult owned units are selling well and not a lot available for sale. So we feel like there's pretty strong demand from that cohort, the active adult cohort. The affordable and subsidized properties are about 4% vacant, which got 116 units. It's just a few vacancies. And some of the properties are maintaining lengthy wait lists. So there's demand for affordable and subsidized senior housing. Where we get into higher vacancy is with the service enhanced. I think the assisted living vacancies are about 17%. Equilibrium is considered to be 7% for assisted living and memory care. And we're seeing that trend everywhere since COVID. Yeah, so during and after COVID, all the service enhanced vacancies shot up, and it's been really slow to recover. Seniors, they're choosing to age in place rather than moving into some sort of, congregate living type facility. So a lot of the assisted living providers are looking for ways to either provide different services or get people into their housing. And that's not just Waverly. Memory care housing is the one exception. That's really need-based. If you're in a position where you need memory care housing, your family's going to help you find something. So that's 100% occupied. Okay. Looking at housing affordability in Waverly, the first bullet talks about cost burden. So by definition, being cost burden means that you're paying more than 30% of your income towards housing costs. And in Waverly, just under 10% of your owner households are considered to be cost burden. But 4% are severely cost burden, meaning that you're paying more than 50% of your income towards housing costs. But both those numbers are a little bit lower than the MSA. And similarly, your rental households, about 42% are cost burdened and 20% are severely cost burdened. So 20% of your renter households are paying more than 50% of their income towards rent. Those numbers are lower than the region, but that 20% number is still pretty high to be for severely cost burdened households.
Is that going to be mostly senior citizens?
A lot of it is, yes.
Yeah.
People on fixed incomes. I was here in 2014 and we prepared a similar study. So I just did kind of benchmarked current housing costs to what we found in 2014. Not surprisingly, the gap in housing affordability is widening. So since the 2014 study, the median household income has increased 35%, while average weekly wages have increased 49%. Now the median resale price during the same time period has gone up 52%, and the average market rate rent has jumped 78%. So incomes and wages are increasing, but not as fast as housing costs.
Can I just get a little confused on the numbers here? How can you have median household income increase 35%, but the average weekly wages increase 49%? Wouldn't those be pretty much in lockstep?
Well, the wages are for people that are employed here. So we know that a large number of those people are commuting in.
Mm-hmm.
So the wages don't just reflect wages of people living in Waverly. And then wages are for one person, whereas the median household income, there could be two earners.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
And fixed income isn't going to raise as much.
Right. I'm just surprised that there's that much of a difference, but
Okay.
go ahead.
Okay. And then the table on the right just kind of relates housing costs in Waverly to household income. I'm definitely going to need my glasses for this one. Sorry about that. So of all the owner households in Waverly, to afford an entry-level home priced at $200,000, about 70% of your existing owner households can afford that purchase price. The number drops to 36% that could afford a move-up single-family home priced at $350,000, and then just 12% that could afford a home priced at $600,000. Looking at the rental stock, the average one-bedroom rent in Waverly right now it's $810 a month. About 54% of your renter households can afford that rent. We estimate that a new construction one-bedroom would cost about $1,200 a month. That's a conservative number. But the number drops to 40% of your renter households could afford $1,200 a month rent. Okay. Okay, so this information isn't necessarily in the study presented in this manner. So what I did is I took your existing housing stock and I split it into 3 different housing affordability categories, just that are, just defined categories. So we have lower income, moderate income, and upper income. Now, typically, moderate income housing is considered to be affordable to people with incomes between 50% and 120% AMI. So lower income is households with 50% AMI or lower, then the upper income is 120% AMI and higher. So I broke it out by your rental housing stock and owned housing. The majority of your housing inventory is priced in that moderate income range. So 50%, 55% of your owner households are in that range, 46% overall. Most of your rental housing stock is priced to be affordable to that lower income market, less than $1,050. So there's a kind of a gap here, because when I was talking to realtors and employers, everyone said what you need is moderate income housing in Waverly. You need more moderate income housing. And I look at your inventory, and that's really what you have. So what's happening is it's not turning over, right? So a lot of that housing stock, especially the owner-occupied housing, it's probably owned by older adults or seniors that are just staying in their single-family homes. Or say I bought a home in 2012 for $200,000. Now I have a family, I want to move up. With the interest rate environment, if I bought a home in 2012 at a 3% interest rate, even though my home value has gone up since then, I can't afford to purchase a new construction home at 7% interest or 6.5%, whatever it's at now. So that interest rate is really slowing down the move-up market. So people aren't moving out of their moderate income homes into a move-up housing unit. So the market, that gets back to the market is stuck. People aren't moving, so we're not getting turnover. So those housing units, even though they're not being made available to people looking for housing. And it's a concern. Okay, just a couple more slides. Bear with me. So based on our demand calculations, we find that there's demand for, call it 1,350 housing units in Waverly out to 2035. That's a lot of housing units when you're averaging 21 new units a year since 2020. Most of it will never be built. Doesn't mean there's not demand, but if you look at, the medium blue here, that reflects your demand for affordable and subsidized housing across all age groups. Your dark blue, that's your service enhanced demand. So the lion's share of your demand is either for affordable and subsidized housing or service enhanced senior housing. And when affordable and subsidized housing is really hard to build. It's really hard to finance. So most of that just never gets built, despite the demand being there. And same with the service enhanced demand. With so many seniors choosing to age in place, it's just really, and the vacancies where they are now, it's just really hard to rationalize building a new service enhanced facility, despite the presence of demand being there. So really most of what's going to be built, it's going to be your for sale housing, and then some of your market rate rental housing. The pie graph on the left shows, it's a breakdown of our general occupancy housing demand, so not age-restricted housing demand. The majority of it is going to be for detached single family, followed by townhomes, twin homes, condos, that type of product. We also find fairly strong demand for market rate rental housing, 126 units over the next 10 years, in addition to affordable and subsidized rental housing. We're not recommending that the city pursue a new rental housing or market rate rental housing development right now, just with vacancies being elevated. But I expect those to come down over the next couple of years. So we think, by 2027, 2030, the market will be able to absorb new market rate rental housing.
So the numbers on the circled graph is the number of units? Those are the numbers of units of each of those kinds?
Yeah, right. So detached single family, we're finding demand for
About
305 units by 2035.
Okay, so your top header has 1,347 housing units. If you add up all the ones on the circle, it's about 700 some.
Right, so the bar graph on the right, that 483, that's general occupancy for sale housing plus market rate active adult for sale housing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I was talking about the one on the left.
Okay.
Equals 7, if you add all those 5 categories together, it's about 700
Yeah.
units, and you've got 1,350 up above.
Right,
What's
so
the
the
difference?
1350 also includes the senior housing, which is on the right.
Oh, so that's a different category.
That's a different
Those are
category,
different
sorry.
categories. Okay.
So does that mean that the two numbers on the left, the 483 and the 195, is that what those 5 numbers are supposed to add up to?
No, okay, so, because we have so many categories that we're
Sure,
talking
yeah, there's overlap and
I tried to consolidate into 4 major categories. So, starting from the left, I'm looking at the bar graph, the 483 in the light blue. That's all of our for sale housing demand, both general occupancy and market rate active adult for sale demand. So the 2 graphs on the right kind of break out the detail. The one on the top is consolidated. So now the next number, the 195 units, that's market rate rental demand from both general occupancy market plus market rate active adult demand. Is that making sense? It's all in the report, all the detail and the calculations. I'm seeing that I should change my presentation a little bit to I tried to simplify it, but confuse matters. So do you have questions on this? The numbers are right, I can tell you that.
So if you're just adding the 2 charts together, is what you're saying.
Basically, so, yeah, so the pie graph on the right, so that's general occupancy demand, 2024 to 2035. And then we're adding in the 2035 demand number to arrive at those just four major categories. So those are built into this top graph. And they all add up to 1,347 when separated. One thing I wanted to point out with the senior demand, you can see, so the bottom number shows your market rate active adult demand. And you can see how demand is demand growth flattens, whereas the service enhanced demand, which is the top number, shoots up. That's because your service enhanced demand is really going to target that 75 and older age group, and that's your fastest growing population. Whereas the 55 to 64 age groups are going to be growing at a much slower pace than the 75 and older age groups.
Although the problem is, like you said, if they're aging in place, and around here, they age in place until they're in their mid to late 80s,
Yeah.
unless they break their hips. It's hard, like you said, how are you going to afford to build a new assisted living facility if it's already got vacancy
Right.
and they're not moving?
Right.
Until actually they get to assisted living and they last about 2 weeks and then they really need nursing care.
Right.
And so that's a problem, right? We have this demand for service enhanced, but they aren't necessarily
Making the
going.
move. Right.
Yeah.
And it's not a problem that's going to go away. It's not just
for
COVID.
psychology, right? Of
But there's also more and more services available that you can get in your home.
theoretically.
Well, right. And then parents are receiving care from their adult children.
Yeah.
The thing I see as a person with a disability and as an occupational therapist is that there's no mention about making universal design homes to fit kind of those folks. And so that, I feel like that's a piece that's missing.
It is touched on in the recommendations. I don't have that in here. So we touched on that. We touched on visitability, if you're familiar. So those are in the recommendations, that some of those policies get worked into, especially if the city is going to provide TIF or something to help stimulate housing, working some of those requirements into the housing that gets built is a recommendation. Okay. Got one more slide. So really, just boiling down the study into three major points. One, there's a need for housing in Waverly across the spectrum, really all housing product types. But what I heard most with more moderately priced or priced under $350,000 for sale housing that would target younger people, your workforce. I heard from several people that Waverly is missing out on potential growth among these younger age groups because they can't find housing here. They can't find suitable housing or affordable housing, housing that's affordable to their income. And then maintenance-free housing alternatives for older adults and seniors that might want to move out of their detached single-family homes. And that could be like a market rate rental project, which, based on our demand, I think Waverly could support something like that now. We also find that there's strong demand for affordable and subsidized rental housing, especially among the senior population. But that requires LAHTC or some sort of government funding to get those built, and it's a competitive process to apply for those funds. And the final point is just, as we already touched on, your existing inventory of moderately priced housing is just not turning over fast enough to meet demand. So whatever the city can do to help get some of that built, whether it's through the Iowa Housing Finance Agency. I know you're working with the developer now, right, on getting some owner-occupied workforce housing built. The more the city can do to help support developers build housing priced under $350,000, I think the better off Waverly will do. The market's going to continue to build $400,000 to $500,000 homes. The city doesn't need to really help with that. It's that next step down. It's not even, don't call it subsidized housing. It's moderately priced housing that would really be targeted to the workforce. So, are there other questions?
So are you saying that the development that we have in process right now should help to meet some of this target that you've identified?
It should, yeah. So that would be the type of housing that would fit into. I don't know exactly where they have their price points, or even if they have those set yet. But I know that the state requires they be targeted to certain AMI levels. So the price will have to be.
It's in that range, isn't it?
I think it's from 290 to 320 construction, but when you put the lot in, it's probably closer to 3.5, maybe above that. So it's in that relative range.
Okay. Which even at that, it's going to be a stretch for a lot of.
Sure.
If you're earning the average wage.
That's where people, the phrases affordable and moderate and all of this is all relative, because Bremer as a whole has a fairly higher average income. Waverly has higher average income. And so what people think when they hear affordable or moderate priced housing, and then they hear 350,000, I'm a school teacher, I'm thinking affordable housing and 350,000 is, way more than I make.
Sure.
But I like to think I'm in middle class, moderate level, but that's just kind of that phrase when people hear, what is moderate or affordable housing,
Yeah.
It isn't a $100,000 house. It's not 120. You're not going to get that. You can't build that now.
It's a garage right now.
No, that's not buildable. And it was just 420,000 was the average new construction right now. And you're looking at we need to try to figure out how we can get $350,000 and below housing. So.
Well, one thing that stood out to me is we're comparing a lot of our housing in Waverly and Bremer County to Waterloo and Cedar Falls. I mean, that's kind of your metropolitan system, your MSA. But I think that a lot of those people who are working in Waverly but commuting from somewhere else, those are people coming from, Allison and Clarksville, a lot of the smaller towns around us. We may be more affordable than Cedar Falls, but I don't know how, I don't think we're more affordable than, Butler County and rural Bremer County. That's where I think we kind of need to see the comparison numbers. Like, how far out of whack are we compared to those smaller towns?
Yeah, we did peer community comparisons, didn't we?
We did.
So there are some select comparisons in there. We're not going to be able to compare every
Sure.
possible city, but,
And those aren't the Allisons and the Shellrocks, though. I mean, we were looking at peer communities more
Right.
regarding size. and
Decorah
do they
was
have
in
a
there,
college
Pella,
and-
yeah.
But I mean, I think when we're talking about all those, what is it, your 900, your 1,000 people who are living in, or working in Waverly but living somewhere else, those are the kind of places that they're living in. So those kind of very rural communities.
Well, I don't know about that. I mean, I think that depends, they're coming from 50 miles away, right?
well, they're coming from, yeah, I mean, the report details like the top 10
Yeah,
cities they're coming from, and I don't have it in front of me.
yeah,
But yeah, I mean, they're coming from all directions,
right.
and
I just have a question about, in the beginning you said Waverly was unique, that we have more homeowners than renters.
not more homeowners, but the owner household growth was stronger than renter household growth. So in most markets where I've been working, and even in the MSA, that's kind of reverse of what we're seeing
Right,
in
but
most
then,
markets.
like on slide 7, you say like basically workers earning average wage could afford the rent that's more here, like they could afford more than the MSA. And then, that was on slide 7, and then there's another slide where it says, basically the one where you broke it down, who can actually afford the renting, who can actually
Yeah.
afford that. That was less than the people looking for houses. I'm just wondering, why would that be?
Okay, so let's go to slide 7 first. That's kind of your first question. So that was the average weekly wage.
So it like, to me, it just seems like they would be more prepared to rent here, seeing as they could afford it in this slide.
Right, well, we don't know. So someone earning the average wage here could afford the market average rent. But we don't, the market average rent may be more affordable elsewhere. So they're, even if they can afford it, it may still be expensive relative to what they want to pay, if that makes, so when I talk affordable, it's all based on 30% of income. So that's kind of the federal standard for affordability. But not everybody pays 30% of their income towards housing costs. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then the next slide, you had a question on?
Well, then when we look at who can afford the houses, like, people were more likely to be able to afford, when you broke it down into that 30 and then even 50, it seemed like the renters were worse off than.
Oh, the cost burden.
Yeah.
Right, and that's going to be the same in any market. There's going to be more cost burden renter households than owner households. Just, a lot of that is, as we talked about, senior households on fixed incomes, paying more than 30% of their income towards housing costs. So that's what cost burden is. Generally, a lot of people become overextended when they buy a home, but you're not going to be allowed to buy a home if you're way overextended. So those numbers are typically going to be less. To be able to maintain your payments, you have to have income that can support them. Is that?
Yeah.
Okay.
I can support what Joe is telling us. One of our owners of one of our manufacturing companies, they have about 100 employees. And he also said a lot of their employees come from 50 miles away. But you think about, if you calculate in the gas and wear and tear on the car and the 2 hours a day of commute time, and still they find it cheaper to live away than here. And I can also support what Councilperson Kangas is saying. I mean, I'm really bothered by how much I paid for my house is 50% of affordable housing. I mean, that puts me in, like, I don't know, a slum. So.
I think we have to remember that some people choose to commute.
Yeah.
I mean, they want to.
No, that's true.
In a rural setting or a smaller town.
Right.
Just like I choose to commute, live in Waverly, and choose to commute to Cedar Falls.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of people in town that commute out. We choose to live here, and it's the same for other people, so I don't think it's necessarily bad to have workers coming in.
No, and I'm not trying to suggest you can capture all of them, but there are some that would And
So,
so I heard
sure.
people want to move to Waverly, but they can't find the right housing for either their price point or what they're looking for.
Yeah, I would agree with the argument that if anyone who's traveling more than 50 miles of commute probably wants to be closer, I mean, not, if not in Waverly, at least closer to Waverly.
Yeah, but again, but they may have a spouse that's going 50 miles the other
The
way
other
too.
direction,
So,
sure.
you know, it's,
Sure.
Or family situation.
Right.
so,
I did talk to a family this week who's, someone from out of town is moving back to Waverly. And they want to buy a nice but moderate house and one level because they're older. They can't find anything to look at, let alone buy. The market's tough. But this would be very helpful for, we have 2 vacant school buildings that are, planning to be housing. This would be extremely important stuff to those organizations as they plan what kind of housing, what kind of prices, what the
Yeah.
market is.
And that final slide kind of boiled it down to what I heard on the
Yeah.
major needs, but you have needs across all housing product types, so it's hard to go wrong, with whatever gets built.
I've got 2 questions. The first one is, part of the stickiness in the resale market right now, as you mentioned, are the high mortgage rates. How much of that is going to self-correct? How much of the issues that you had here are going to self-correct if the mortgage rates go down to 4.5%, 5%? Is that availability going to be increased?
Is housing availability?
Well, if are people, one of the problems with and forgive me for the labels on the categories, but the 250,000 category, people are unwilling to move up to the next 350, 400,000 because the interest rates are so high and their payments are going to go up by a ton. If interest rates decline and it makes that movement easier to do, are we going to see some of that stickiness in the market disappear?
That's what I expect. I would expect that to happen. One of the best ways to create turnover of those more moderately priced homes is to get people to purchase move-up housing. And it's just not happening enough right now. And I think interest rates are playing a major role in that. So if interest rates come down, it'll be much more affordable to purchase. A $420,000 home at a 7% interest rate is a lot more expensive than $420,000 at 5%.
And I would assume that declining interest rates would help the new construction market also, because it would make it easier for people to get into those new construction homes than it would be right now. I would hate to be a developer and trying to develop homes and trying to sell them on a 7% mortgage.
Oh, right, and I think that's part of why we really saw that slowdown post-COVID so as interest rates went up, your building activity slowed down.
Well, the second question I have is probably more pertinent, is what impact can we have on any of this stuff as a city? Is there something that we can do to impact this?
Yes. So what you've done with the workforce housing development that's going on, you provided a match, if I remember right. There'll probably be more opportunities for that type of assistance. If you get into rental housing development or market rate active adult development, providing TIF, tax abatements, even things like evaluating your zoning ordinance to find ways to allow more flexibility in what gets built. There's so many zoning ordinances, and I don't know specifically Waverly zoning ordinance, but they restrict minimum lot size, minimum garage size, minimum house size. And that all that adds cost to the housing that's being built. Require larger. So if you can find ways to allow more flexibility in what types of homes get built, my thought being more affordably priced housing, whether it's smaller homes. I hear a lot about tiny homes in the past year or two. I don't know if that's a great long-term solution, but that's the kind of concept I'm thinking. Right now your zoning ordinance probably wouldn't allow a tiny home to be built, on permanent foundation on a lot. But, you know, anything you can do to ease those restrictions to lower the development costs ultimately gets passed on to a buyer, should anyway.
I'm wondering, Rod, how much interest rates going down to be offset by how much housing insurance is going up.
Yes.
I know my
And construction costs, you know.
My condo association, last year, our housing for 18 units was $6,000. This year, it's $30,000. If that's happening to all the homeowners in town, it's going to be devastating.
You touched on, something that's nagging at me is, you know, we talked about interest rates, that's certainly a variable that has a huge impact on affordability for everyone. But an area that I feel like we have very little impact on is building costs. And when we're looking at building costs at $300 a square foot for nice but not fancy, and we have no control over that, and those costs are not going to come down. Once they go up, they don't.
No, I know.
They don't come down. So, I feel like we need to be thinking really creatively. You touched on tiny homes. Certainly that's something that helps address those factors, but you know, if we need to be looking at tapping into resources that are exploring ways to build more inexpensively, I feel like that's a huge variable that, because we don't have much control over it, we just kind of set it aside and say, well, we need more affordable housing. But if it can't be built for that $200,000, then we're just beating ourselves over the head.
Well, you're not going to be able to, you can't help with building costs, labor costs, but if you can do things to reduce your development fees or infrastructure charges, you know, while they're not impacting building costs, it brings down the cost of the total development. You know, even things as simple as being a resource for first-time home buyers. You know, you don't need to provide grants, but the state has grants for first-time buyers. You know, being a resource for potential first-time home buyers. This is where you can go to find funding, and kind of, you don't need to provide the funding, but you can be the resource to tell them where to go to provide funding, or to get funding for that type of work. I don't know if I didn't really answer your question, but.
No, I feel like you're touching on that creativity part that I mentioned.
Sure, okay.
That I just feel like we have to be thinking outside of the box, because we can't just say, well, we need interest rates to come down and we need more affordable housing. That doesn't solve the issue.
No, and then there's the toolkit's large. You know, in some cities, they acquire land and then give it to a developer to develop and bring down costs that way. I don't know, Waverly's in a position where you need to do that, but I think you hit the nail on the head with the creativity piece. Tap into a lot of different tools to get it accomplished.
Well, it reminds me of our conversations about the old Irving property, you know, which is we thought about townhomes and we've talked about tiny houses and something, you know, outside the box to put there. Because, I mean, cost-wise, multifamily is more desirable, perhaps, but then how to get the neighborhood to accept it, and so that's where we got with the tiny houses, thinking, could we do something like that there? But
In one of the magazines we get, I think the Municipal, there was a really interesting article, interesting to me, about if you have a big enough lot, could you put in a little house and that becomes grandma's house? So your aging in place parent can live in a separate building but on your lot. That's not currently allowed under our P&Z, but that would help people to age in place but also to move.
Yeah, so you're talking about an ADU, an accessory dwelling unit.
Yeah.
And more cities are beginning to allow that type of.
Councilperson Meyer, I think Beth Ann would let you live on her yard.
We actually tried that and it wasn't a go.
Oh, you should talk to John Meyer about that.
You say something about me, speak up, please.
You know, I'm gonna, put something up here on a hill and wait for you guys all to shoot it down, but, I mean, clearly, this is a problem that's going to need some consideration and some thought and some thinking outside the box. I'm wondering if it might be a good idea to establish a commission that works with Connie to come up with some of the solutions to some of the housing issues that can then be brought to the council for consideration, so that we can come up with some of these ideas and do some work on them, get some community input. I know we no longer have an Economic Development Commission for several good reasons. One of them being that it is an open commission meeting, open to the public, and no business or developer in their right mind is going to want to show their cards before they have to. So that's not something that would be appropriate. But I'm thinking just a group of 3 or 4 citizens that could work with Connie in coming up with some ideas on this stuff. So number one, we get a little bit more people involved in this. And then secondly, that this doesn't all fall on Connie's shoulders to say, well, she's the development person. Let her come up with all the ideas on how we're going to move forward in this. Because if there are some things we can do as a city, I think we need to take a look and see what things we can do and what things we may want to do and what things are within our means to do. And then I'm someone who believes very forward in making plans and then moving forward with them, not just making plans. So maybe having some kind of structure in place where we can make plans and then carry them through would be helpful. Just a thought. I mean, obviously we don't have to, we can't make a decision, I think, tonight. But my reading on this is that there are some things that we can do, but there are no magic bullets. There isn't one thing that we can do and suddenly we have all of this housing that shows up. And if we're really serious about this being an issue, and this has come up over and over and over and over again in every survey that we do, maybe we need to really spend some time and elbow grease in figuring out some ways that we can make some changes and move this thing forward. I don't hear anyone shooting me down.
Come on, people. Yeah, it's a study session, so we're not shooting today.
I suppose my observation is the fact we've got housing shortage and housing pressures, that's what happens when your city is growing. There are lots of cities that are kind of dying on the vine that have like no shortage of vacant houses.
Yeah.
So I mean, we can talk about how horrible it is that we have a housing shortage, but that represents the fact that we are a growing community.
Yeah, making sure we have the
We need to make sure we have enough
capacity
housing.
for what people want.
We need to make sure we have enough housing that it doesn't slow down our growth, that it doesn't get in the way, doesn't hinder our growth. But we also have to acknowledge that a shortage in housing is one of the things that happens when you grow. That, there are communities that are dying that have lots of, vacant houses all over town.
I think the other thing is if we're going to have a growing population of people over the age of 75, you're going to need the
Caregivers.
Agencies, caregivers and agencies to do that at a living wage in order that those people can purchase houses or afford to rent. And so I think that's going to be daunting, especially in a town of our size, Well,
I hear horror stories in California where, you got the housing is so expensive, but they don't have people, the teachers, the nurses, all the, service
Sure.
workers, they're living in campers and stuff because they can't buy housing.
So I hear you saying it's a good problem to have, nonetheless, it's still a problem.
Yes. It's a problem that's better than the alternative.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, you need to put it in perspective.
Is there any more questions for Joe or discussion among the council?
Where is the entire study? Where do we find that?
It's on our website, and I did email it out back
Oh,
in
you did?
December.
Okay.
I can email the link out again in the morning.
Thank you.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Anything else?
Very interesting.
Joe, thank you very much
Thank
for
you.
being here and for your hard work.
Thank you.
And Connie, thank you too.
Thanks, Connie.
Council, if you're prepared, we'll move on to item F. These are reports from the boards and commissions. We've got two of them tonight, P&Z and Human Equity and Diversity. Any questions or response to those? I'm to understand there's been some confusion online about human equity and diversity. What they're working on right now is a really good idea about fighting loneliness in our community and doing some stellar work. Staff updates, James, got any staff updates?
Do not, sir.
Thank you. City council comments? Councilperson Birgen.
I will be at the Wooden Foot if anyone wants to come and discuss city politics after the meeting.
Thank you. Councilperson Jones.
No,
Councilperson?
there's a basketball game on right now.
They may be showing it at the Wooden Foot.
Councilperson Meyers.
Live, too.
Councilperson Kangas. Councilperson Drenkow.
I'll pass.
Councilperson Rathe.
Thank you to the Human Equity and Diversity Commission for yesterday's meeting. We had a very thought-provoking brainstorming and discussion session about loneliness in the community, how to identify it, how to combat it. I also wanted to mention the passing of Darwin Rickers, who was instrumental for years in organizing, planning, carrying out the Heritage Days Festival. He was a police officer here in Waverly back in the day, and just was a tireless volunteer for that festival, and he passed away recently, so just wanted to recognize him.
Councilperson Wolff.
When meetings are announced, they are open to the public. So I just encourage people that if you have concerns about any commissions or meetings, show up and learn what they actually are.
Thank you. Guest councilperson.
Thanks for having me. I'm taking a policy administration class right now, so it's interesting to see some of the things we're learning about actually happening. So thank you.
Excellent. I said on the radio this morning that this would be the most interesting council meeting of the year. I'm going to stand by that. There's a lot of information, but a lot of Waverly's past, present, and a lot about our future that is in front of us tonight. So we can move forward and struggle with possible solutions in the months to come. So thank you, everybody. I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Did we adjourn?
Can I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? That passed unanimously. We are adjourned.